The overheated gymnasium of Northwood high smelled of sweat, cheap coffee, and simmering resentment. The monthly school board meeting was in its third hour, and the air was thick with bureaucratic jargon and the sharp tang of budget cuts. In the back, leaning on a mop handle, was Henry, the night janitor. At 58, his frame was sturdy, his hands calloused from a lifetime of work, his eyes holding a deep, patient wisdom that missed nothing. Up front, the board members sat at a folding table, fielding complaints from frustrated parents. Board President Gary Dobbs, a man with perpetually red face and a too-tight tie, gabbled down a parent arguing for renewed arts funding. People, please. We're facing a $2 million deficit. Dobbs barked, his voice echoing. The state won't bail us out. We have to make tough choices. Arts and music are luxuries we can't afford. It's math and reading that matter. A young mother, Ms. Ruiz, stood, her voice trembling. But my daughter, Sophia, art is the only thing that keeps her engaged. She has anxiety. Anxiety isn't in the budget, ma'am, Dobbs said with a dismissive wave. Next, as the meeting droned on, a board member's young son, bored and fidgeting, knocked over a large cup of soda. The sticky, brown liquid cascaded off the table and began pooling on the polished gym floor. Dobbs scowled in disgust. You, janitor, clean this up. Now! All eyes turned to Henry. He didn't flinch. He simply gave a slow, single nod. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, wheeling his custodial cart toward the mess. As he passed the board table, Dobbs didn't even look at him, but muttered just loud enough for the nearby members to hear. Finally, something he's qualified to handle. A few board members snickered. Henry's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, but he continued his work. He knelt, laying down absorbent cloths, his movements efficient and practiced. He'd heard it all before, the casual slights, the dismissive tones. To them, he was part of the background, a fixture less noticeable than the bleachers. What they didn't know was that Henry wasn't just a janitor. He was Henry Hank McCullough, the reclusive billionaire founder of Apex Solutions, a tech conglomerate that had revolutionized data storage. He had taken his company public, made a fortune, and then quietly stepped away, disappearing from the public eye. He'd taken his job 6 months ago at Northwood, the very school he'd attended as a poor black kid, to see the ground truth of the education system he planned to pour his billions into fixing. He wanted to understand where the cracks were before he tried to fill them. As he worked, Ms. Ruiz approached him, her eyes full of apology. "I'm so sorry about that," she whispered, gesturing towards Dobbs. Henry looked up, his warm brown eyes crinkling. "Don't you worry about me, Ms. Ruiz. You worry about your Sophia." He finished mopping and pulled a crisp, white business card from a small, worn leather wallet. It was simple, bearing only a name, Henry McCullough, and a phone number. "You call that number tomorrow. Tell the woman who answers that Henry said to help with Sophia's art. She's a good friend who runs an after-school program." Ms. Ruiz took the card, confused but grateful. "Thank you, Henry." The meeting finally adjourned. As the board members packed up, Dobbs walked past Henry's cart, his phone pressed to his ear, complaining loudly. Yeah, another waste of an evening, listening to sob stories and watching a janitor mop up pop. I tell you, this district is going down the tubes. We need a miracle, or at least a donor with deep pockets, who isn't some ghost. He strode out, not noticing that the janitor he'd just insulted was listening intently, a small, knowing smile on his face. Henry finished his shift and drove not to a small apartment, but to a secure, discreet penthouse overlooking the city. He opened his laptop and typed a single command into a private server. A file opened, Project Phoenix, Northwood District Revitalization. It was a fully developed, $50 million plan to restore arts, music, and vocational programs, with a $10 million endowment for teacher salaries. All it needed was a signature and a public face to attach the donation to. He had planned to remain anonymous, to let the money do the talking, but after tonight, he saw that wouldn't be enough. Throwing money at a broken, arrogant system would just make the people in charge richer. They needed to be humbled. They needed to see the value in the people they so casually dismissed. He picked up a secure satellite phone and dialed. A crisp, efficient voice answered. "Mr. McCullough." "Eleanor," Henry said, his voice now carrying the quiet authority of a man who commanded boardrooms. "The Northwood assessment is complete. The leadership is deficient. We're moving to phase 2. I want you to schedule a meeting with the entire school board. Tell them potential donor. The Phoenix Foundation wants to discuss a transformative gift. And Eleanor, make it clear my attendance is mandatory." He hung up and looked out at the glittering city. Gary Dobbs had asked for a miracle. He was about to get one. He just had no idea it would be delivered by the man he'd told to clean up spilled soda. The email from the Phoenix Foundation landed in Gary Dobbs' inbox like a winning lottery ticket. It was crisp, professional, and mentioned a transformative 8-figure gift contingent on a meeting with the full board. Dobbs read it 3 times, his heart thumping against his starched shirt. This was the miracle he'd whined about. He immediately called an emergency board meeting, his voice crackling with uncharacteristic excitement. "This is it, people. The Phoenix Foundation. I've done some digging. They're a massive, anonymous philanthropic fund. This could solve our budget crisis overnight." The other board members, still riding the high, began planning how to spend the imaginary windfall. "We can finally renovate the football field," one said. "Forget that. We need new smart boards in every classroom," argued another. The arts programs, the very thing they had just cut, weren't even mentioned. The meeting with the foundation was set for Friday afternoon in the school's formal conference room, a room Henry usually cleaned after hours. Dobbs insisted the custodial staff have it spotless. "Especially you, Henry," Dobbs said, spotting him buffing the hallway floor. "The foundation rep will be here. I want this place gleaming. First impressions are everything." Henry simply nodded, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "It'll be ready, Mr. Dobbs." Friday arrived. The board members sat around the polished table, dressed in their best suits, fidgeting with their ties. Dobbs had even ordered a platter of expensive pastries. They were a court awaiting a king. The door opened, and Eleanor, a woman in a razor-sharp suit, entered. She carried a leather-bound portfolio and an air of unimpeachable authority. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cool, "I am Eleanor Vance, Chief of Operations for the Phoenix Foundation. My principal will join us shortly." Dobbs practically tripped over himself to pull out a chair for her. "We are so honored. Please, thank your principal for considering our humble district. We have so many wonderful initiatives we could." Eleanor held up a hand, silencing him. "The foundation's giving a strategic, Mr. Dobbs. We invest in leadership as much as in programs. My principal will be the judge of that." Just then, the conference room door opened again. All heads turned. It was Henry. He was dressed not in his custodial uniform, but in a tailored, charcoal gray suit that cost more than Dobbs's car. His posture was different, erect, commanding. The calloused hands that held a mop now held a simple tablet. He looked every inch the billionaire he was. He walked ahead of the table as the board members stared, utterly bewildered. Dobbs shot to his feet, his face flushing with confusion and anger. "Henry, what is the meaning of this? This is a private meeting. You're supposed to be cleaning the B-wing bathrooms." Henry ignored him, placing the tablet on the table. He looked at each stunned board member in turn. "Mr. Dobbs, gentlemen," Henry said, his voice the same, but the quiet authority now unmistakable. "I am the principal of the Phoenix Foundation. You can call me Henry." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dobbs's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The pastry platter sat untouched, a symbol of their profound miscalculation. Henry continued, his gaze settling on Dobbs. "At our last meeting, you said this district needed a donor with deep pockets. You said you needed a miracle." He paused, letting the memory of his own humiliation hang in the air. "You were right, but you also said that cleaning a spill was the only thing I was qualified to handle. Today, we're going to determine what you are qualified to handle." He tapped his tablet, and a sleek presentation filled the screen on the wall. It was Project Phoenix. The board members watched, slack-jawed, as slide after slide detailed a $50 million investment, fully funded arts and music programs, state-of-the-art vocational workshops, a teacher endowment. It's all here, Henry said. The miracle you asked for. But the Phoenix Foundation doesn't write blank checks. Our investment requires a complete restructuring of the district's priorities and, more importantly, its leadership. He turned his attention back to Dobbs, whose face was now a sickly shade of pale green. So, Gary, Henry said, his tone deceptively mild, let's start with your resignation. Then we can discuss who is truly qualified to lead. The word resignation hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Gary Dobbs stared at Henry, his mind refusing to reconcile the janitor in a stained uniform with the billionaire philanthropist in a bespoke suit. The other board members looked like statues, frozen between shock, fear, and a desperate, greedy hope. "This is a joke," Dobbs stammered, his voice cracking. "A sick, twisted joke. You can't be serious." "I am rarely anything else, Gary," Henry replied, his voice calm but leaving no room for argument. He gestured to the $50 million plan on the screen. "This is real. My money is real. My condition is non-negotiable. Your leadership is a primary obstacle to this district's success. Your resignation is the first step." One of the other board members, a woman named Carol, found her voice. "Mr. McCullough, surely we can discuss this. Gary has years of institutional knowledge. Perhaps a transition period." Henry's gaze shifted to her. "The time for transitions was before you cut the art programs that children like Sophia Ruiz depend on, before you decided that anxiety isn't in the budget. You presided over the decay. You don't get to oversee the rebirth." He turned his attention back to Dobbs. "You have a choice. You can resign gracefully with a public statement about wanting to pursue new opportunities. In return, I will deposit the first $5 million into the district's account within 24 hours. The arts programs will be reinstated by Monday." A collective, sharp intake of breath went around the table. $5 million. Just like that. "Or," Henry continued, his voice dropping to a colder register, "you can refuse. I will then withdraw my offer and publicly announce why. I will detail the district's failures and your specific role in them, supported by the recordings I have of every board meeting where you dismissed parents and insulted staff. I will use my resources to ensure every parent, every teacher, and every news outlet in the state knows the story. You will be forced out in disgrace, and this district will get nothing." It was a masterstroke. He was offering Dobbs a golden parachute and the district a lifeline, all while holding a detonator to Dobbs' professional reputation. The other board members stared at Dobbs, their eyes pleading. The money was so close they could taste it. Dobbs felt the walls closing in. He saw the avarice in his colleagues' eyes. They would throw him to the wolves for that money. His pride warred with his survival instinct. "Fine," he spat out, the word tasting like ash. "You win. I'll resign." "Wise choice," Henry said. He nodded to Eleanor, who produced a single sheet of paper, a pre-written resignation letter, and a pen. She slid them across the table to Dobbs. His hand trembled as he signed it. He was signing away his power, his status, his identity. "Effective immediately," Henry stated, taking the signed letter. "Eleanor will handle the press release. The funds will be transferred." He looked at the rest of the board. "As for the rest of you, your positions are provisional. Your performance will be evaluated over the next 90 days. Step out of line and you'll join Gary." He stood, the meeting clearly over. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at the defeated Dobbs. "Oh, and Gary," Henry said, a glint in his eye, "there's a spill in the teacher's lounge. Since you're now between opportunities, you're qualified to handle it." Henry and Eleanor exited, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The board members slowly filed out, avoiding Dobbs' gaze. He was left alone in the conference room, the remnants of the pastry platter mocking him. He felt a burning, impotent rage. He had been humiliated, dethroned by a janitor. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking with fury. He couldn't let this stand. He dialed a number. "Mitchell? It's Gary Dobbs," he said, his voice a low, venomous whisper. I need you to dig. Dig up everything you can on a Henry McCullough. I don't care what it costs. There has to be something. A scandal, a lawsuit, anything. He thinks he's won. I'm going to show him that real power doesn't wear a suit. It operates in the shadows. The private investigator, a man named Mitchell who specialized in corporate espionage, worked fast. Within 72 hours of Gary Dobbs' humiliating resignation, a preliminary dossier landed in his email. Dobbs pored over it in his home study, a single lamp illuminating pages that detailed Henry McCullough's meteoric rise. He learned about Apex Solutions, the tech behemoth Henry had built from scratch. He saw the Forbes covers, the Philanthropic Awards, and the staggering net worth. It was all deeply, depressingly legitimate. The man was a saint in the eyes of the business world. But Mitchell had included a final, speculative note at the end of his report. Asterisk, subject is notoriously private. No major scandals on record. However, his sudden departure from Apex's day-to-day operations 5 years ago remains unexplained in official narratives. Corporate filings show he transferred voting control of his shares to a blind trust, citing personal reasons. The timing coincided with sealed legal case in Delaware Chancery Court. Case hashtag 734BX9. I cannot access the details. This is the only anomaly in an otherwise spotless record. Asterisk, a sealed case, unexplained departure, personal reasons. Dobbs' eyes lit up with predatory glee. This was the crack. This was the leverage. It didn't matter what was in the file. All that mattered was a suggestion of a secret. He could weaponize the uncertainty. He didn't have the resources to unseal a court record, but he knew who did. He placed a call to a contact in a notorious partisan news outlet, the American Sentinel. I have a story for you, Dobbs said, injecting just the right amount of scandalized concern into his voice. This savior of Northwood, Henry McCullough, his entire philanthropic act, is a sham. I have it on good authority. He was forced out of his own company. There's a sealed court case, a cover-up. He's not a benefactor. He's a disgracio using our children's future to launder his reputation. It was a perfect narrative for the outlet. The liberal billionaire with a dark secret, corrupting a local school district. They bid immediately. The next morning, the article dropped. The headline was brutal. Northwood's philanthropist savior has a secret. Mystery court case and unexplained exit from billion-dollar company. It was all innuendo and speculation, but it was presented as a bombshell investigation. It questioned Henry's motives, his integrity, and most damningly his stability. The phrase, "what is he hiding?" was repeated like a mantra. The effect was instantaneous. The school board members, who had been falling over themselves to please Henry, grew cold and distant. The planned press conference to announce the Project Phoenix grant was postponed indefinitely. Whispers followed Henry in the hallways he once cleaned. The tide of public opinion, so fickle, began to turn. Gratitude was being replaced by suspicion. Henry watched it unfold from his penthouse, a grim expression on his face. Eleanor stood beside him, her tablet glowing with the toxic article. "Dobbs," she stated flatly. "Of course," Henry replied. "He's using the oldest trick in the book. When you can't attack the argument, attack the person. He's created a shadow. We can issue a statement. We can sue for defamation." Eleanor offered. "And give the story more oxygen?" "No. A public fight is what he wants. It keeps the doubt alive." Henry shook his head. The only way to kill a shadow is to turn on the light. He knew what he had to do. He had to unseal the court records himself. He had to reveal the very thing he had spent 5 years trying to keep private. It was the only way to reclaim the narrative and save the district's funding. He called his lawyer. "File the motion, David. Unseal case hashtag 734, BX9. Henry." His lawyer's voice was heavy with concern. "Are you sure? The publicity, the personal cost." "The cost of these children is higher," Henry said, his voice firm. "Do it." The motion was filed. A hearing was set for the following week. The media, smelling an even bigger story, descended on the courthouse. Henry would have to stand before a judge and explain why the records should be public. He would have to face the cameras and the world. On the day of a hearing, Henry walked into the courthouse, a solitary figure against a barrage of flashing cameras. He saw Dobbs in the back of the room, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He believed he had won, that he had forced Henry into a corner where he would be exposed as a fraud. What Dobbs didn't know was that Henry wasn't there to hide. He was there to reveal a truth far more powerful than any lie. The judge called the court to order and approved the motion to unseal. The court clerk stood, holding the thin case file that held Henry's secret. As the clerk began to read the summary into the official record, Henry closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. The secret he had carried for 5 years was about to become public, and the fallout would change everything. The courtroom was utterly silent, the air thick with anticipation. Every reporter leaned forward, pens poised. Gary Dobbs held his breath, a victorious sneer already forming on his lips, ready for the revelation of fraud, embezzlement, some glorious scandal that would destroy Henry McCullough. The court clerk's voice, calm and clear, cut through the silence. In the matter of the guardianship of one, Maya Grace McCullough, the court finds a petitioner, Henry McCullough, to be a fit and proper guardian. Parental rights are hereby permanently severed for the child's biological parents, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Vane, on ground of severe and sustained neglect, abuse, and substance abandonment. The clerk continued, detailing the harrowing specifics. A child found malnourished, living in squalor, while her parents squandered a family inheritance. The file contained photos, medical reports, and heartfelt testimonies from Henry about finding his great-niece in a drug den and his 5-year legal battle to save her, fighting her powerful, connected parents who fought him at every turn to maintain access to a trust fund. He had sealed the case to protect Maya, to give her a chance at a normal childhood, shielded from the public spectacle and the venom of her biological parents. His sudden departure from Apex wasn't about scandal. It was about becoming a full-time father to a traumatized little girl who needed him. The secret wasn't a crime. It was an act of profound love and sacrifice. A collective, stunned exhale moved through the room. The reporter's expression shifted from predatory hunger to something resembling shame. Dobbs' smug face crumpled into confusion, then dawning horror. He hadn't uncovered a scandal. He had uncovered a hero. Henry stood. He didn't look at Dobbs. He looked at the judge, and then at the cameras. For 5 years, my only goal is to give my daughter a quiet, safe, and happy life, he said. His voice resonated with a raw emotion the public had never heard from the billionaire. I took the job at Northwood to be close to her school, to understand the world she was growing up in. I saw a system that was failing all its children, just as the system had failed Maya before I found her. Project Phoenix was born from that. It was my promise to her, and to every child who feels unseen, that they matter. He turned now, his gaze finally landing on Gary Dobbs, pinning him to a seat. You tried to use my love for my daughter as a weapon against me, Henry said, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room. You thought my desire to protect her was a vulnerability you could exploit. You were wrong. It is my greatest strength, and it is the reason I will not let you, or anyone like you, stand in the way of giving other children the opportunities my Maya now has. The story flipped in an instant. The narrative of the secretive, possibly corrupt billionaire was incinerated, replaced by the story of the reclusive guardian who became a janitor to be near his daughter. Hashtag Henry the Hero started trending. The school board, sensing the cataclysmic shift, immediately called an emergency session and publicly reinstated Project Phoenix, begging for Henry's forgiveness. Dobbs was finished. He was universally condemned a pariah. That evening, Henry sat in his penthouse, watching the supportive news coverage. Maya, now a bright-eyed 10-year-old, hugged him. I'm sorry, Uncle Hank. It's my fault. No, baby girl, he said. Hold her tight. You are the reason for all of this. You made me see what was important. It seemed like a total, heartwarming victory. The lie was exposed. The funding was secure. His name was cleared. But as Henry scrolled through the news, a final, chilling email from his security chief came through. The subject line, biological parents. The body was brief. Asterisk Sir Charles and Eliza Vane have been released from their 3rd rehab stint. They've seen the news. They know Maya's location. They are claiming you brainwashed her and stole her from them. They are demanding a new custody hearing. And they're giving interviews. They're coming. Asterisk. The battle with the school board was over, but the fight for his daughter was about to begin again. The news of Maya's biological parents resurfacing hit Henry like a physical blow. The old fear, the one he'd carried for 5 years, coiled tight in his stomach. Charles and Eliza Vane weren't just negligent. They were manipulative, charismatic grifters who saw their daughter not as a child, but as a financial asset. Their interviews were masterclasses in performative grief, painting Henry as a ruthless billionaire who had used his wealth to kidnap their child. But Henry was no longer the man who had quietly sealed a court case. He was a father who had been publicly tested and a philanthropist who had found his mission. This time, he wouldn't hide. He scheduled a live, primetime town hall at Northwood High. In the very gym where this had all begun, the nation would be watching. He invited the Vanes, daring them to show up. The gym was packed. Students, teachers, parents, and a forest of media cameras filled the space. On one side of the small stage sat Charles and Eliza Vane, dressed in cheap, somber clothes, playing the part of wronged, simple folk. On the other sat Henry, with Maya holding his hand, her small face brave but scared. A moderator began, but Henry raised his hand. With respect, let me speak directly to Charles and Eliza. He turned to them, his voice calm but resonating through the silent gym. You say I stole Maya. Let's show everyone what I stole her from. He nodded to Eleanor. A screen descended, and a video began to play. It was security footage from 5 years earlier, showing a dilapidated apartment. It showed a gaunt, terrified 4-year-old Maya, alone for hours, crying as her parents stumbled in and out, clearly under the influence. It showed Henry, not as a billionaire, but as a frantic great-uncle, begging them to let him take her for a weekend just to get her clean clothes and a hot meal. The raw, unedited despair in his voice was undeniable. Then he played their own words, audio recordings of phone calls, legally obtained during the custody battle, where Charles and Eliza discussed Maya only as a meal ticket and a way to get to Hank's money. The performance shattered. The Vanes squirmed, their masks of victimhood crumbling under the weight of their own recorded cruelty. You didn't want a daughter, Henry said, his voice cracking with emotion. You wanted an ATM. I didn't steal her. I rescued her. He then turned to the crowd. And this school, this community, you helped me save her. You gave her a place where she felt safe. You showed her what a real community looks like. That's why Project Phoenix isn't just a donation. It's a down payment on my debt to you. It's my promise that no child in Northwood will ever feel as alone and unseen as Maya did. He looked at Gary Dobbs, who was sitting in the back, trying to be invisible. And even you, Gary, played a part. You showed me that the greatest poverty isn't a lack of money. It's a poverty of character, of empathy. And that is a deficit we must all fight to overcome. The gym erupted, not in cheers, but in a profound emotional silence that was quickly filled by the sound of tears and then a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The Vanes, exposed and defeated, were quietly escorted out by security, their claims legally and morally annihilated. In the final scene, it is a year later. The camera pans across a transformed Northwood. A new arts wing bears Maya's name, a thriving community garden, where students like Sophia Ruiz sell their produce, flourishes on what was once a cracked parking lot. Henry, dressed not in a suit but in a comfortable sweater, is on his knees in the garden, helping a group of kindergartners plant tomatoes. Maya is beside him, laughing, her anxiety a distant memory, her hand firmly holding her uncle's. He wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just Henry, a father, a gardener, a builder of futures. The legacy wasn't in the money. It was in the soil, in the music, in the light in a child's eyes. The work was done, and a new, better story had begun. Prejudice saw a janitor, but a child saw a hero. Arrogance saw a servant, but a community found a savior. The greatest wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the futures we build and the hearts we heal. The end. Click the share button to help reach our audience. for stories of social justice and the fight for a just world. Follow for more.